We may have been the ones who were like starting to tear community down because we didn't like what it had looked like for past generations. I think I would argue that we've taken it definitely like many steps too far in that people are so isolated now. And I can completely understand why the appeal.
In our original hunter-gatherer societies, people who were more alert to danger survived longer. And a kind of evolutionary fallout of that is our desire to ascribe intention and personality to things that either don't exist or are inanimate objects.
Any point that a religion reaches the shelves of Primark for you to be able to buy it in their homeware department, you have to question how authentic to its original moral standing or like ethos it really is.
And actually that's done it a disservice because young people find all of this kind of soulless and weak, and what they want is discipline and community, but apparently particularly young men who have been so clearly left out of the kind of changing liberal society. So Catholicism is hugely back in vogue amongst young people, and Islam.
Hi, I'm Christina Rhodes.
And I'm Tempest Rose.
We are two millennial women 4 decades in.
We're revisiting the culture that made us, with a little more hindsight.
And a lot less bullshit.
We've made our own rules.
Built our own spotlights.
And we're here to speak our minds without playing dumb.
And without playing nice. Life is a mystery.
Everyone must stand alone. I am very grateful to Madonna for informing much of my religious, cultural upbringing. About the age of 3 till 5, like the prayer.
Classic.
Nothing
to do with being raised by a Catholic mother, correct?
Catholicism is an aesthetic and an art as much as a religious system. and I love it.
Great.
No, you're catching us at the end of our silly tail-end conversation about the opening lyrics to Like a Prayer, because today we are talking all about religion, God.
Spirituality.
Yeah. That beautiful 90s heyday. Shall we start with possibly one of the most meaningful, impactful, life-changing pieces of popular culture to hit our generation?
The Craft?
Yes.
How did I know? Followed swiftly on by Practical Magic.
Oh my God, I love that film.
But the lime and the coconut. Yeah.
That was my fantasy, to live in that house.
Me too. And then I wanted to just like open a little botanical, witchy moisturizing store on a small street in the middle of what looked like outskirts of Seattle.
Yes. Oh my God, it was so beautiful.
I'm not sure I've let go of that fantasy, actually.
Don't. Let's find that house.
Retirement community, here we go.
This is such a millennial thing. The wonderful Desiree, who is Sacred Wise Magic online, who, those of you who know House of Bellairs may have met Desiree at some of our events, literally recently did this thing outside the American Horror Story house that they use in Coven. It was like, hey, isn't it just your fantasy for us all to move into a house like this and live here? Why is that such a millennial woman thing?
I don't know, but it really is. And then there's like so many more experiences of films just like that. One day. Sorry. So The Craft. So I remember watching The Craft, and I remember feeling like, oh my God, they're so cool. And it's so cool to be witchy. And like, that's like what I should do. And then I can't remember exactly how old I was, but as a preteen years, and my best friend and I bought a like preteen book on witchcraft, and we read it in a car on like a long road journey somewhere. And and I was like so convinced I was going to be a little witch. But then I rewatched it, at least part of it, and it was a lot more problematic than we remember, Tempest. A lot more problematic.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I've seen it for decades.
First of all, on a side tangent, it has terrible audio like balancing, like so many 90s movies.
They're all really blurry as well.
Yes.
I just watched all 28 days, 28 years, blah, blah. And the first one is so, like, we're used to seeing stuff in such high definition now It looks like I'm watching a pirate film, but that was an official DVD.
Yeah, and as I rewatched it, and listen, I think that there are aspects of storyline which are good, which are about them trying to, like reclaim their power and, and sort of the terribleness of high school politics and being bullied and trying to, again, sort of like reclaim some of yourself in that. But there's a lot of really problematic issues as well, because they're portrayed, while that's nice, they're actually portrayed in a really negative, quite weak way, where a lot of it also just seems to kind of bleed into it being about female hysteria and sort of not taking them seriously. And what they're doing is self-serving and quite sort of superficial and just a bit base compared to, the sort of proper religious order, which sits outside of what they're doing. So I thought it was nice, but it's not actually what you would want. They're not developed as characters in a way that you would want to be, showing young women to young women.
You wouldn't want young women to aspire to the way that they behave in the film?
No.
God, I should watch it again. Do you think that they're trying to make a lesson about sort of female, like purity spiraling, like female to female bullying, sort of female in-groups and how they function? Am I just projecting too much intelligence onto the film?
I do. I think you are projecting too much, because I was looking back at some other films that I recommended my brother and my niece watch, 13 going on 30. And in the opening of the film, she talks about, we're going to do 7 minutes in heaven where you can go into a closet and the boy can do anything you want. Just so cringe when you say it out loud. But my mind
sounds like a crying waiting to happen.
But also just feels like nobody, like my mind just blanked when I listened to that, to the point that I was like happy to recommend my niece watch it. My brother's like, what is wrong with you? It's not what I want my little girl growing up with. But I think the 90s was full of making films where they may have been like, they just knew that it'd be a cultural phenomenon where they all looked hot and they were doing something a little bit different. And in the way that it's a slight coming of age story, they knew that they would get a lot of support for it. Not like blockbuster support, not that they were going to be going out and making young women make intelligent decisions.
You raise such an interesting point, which is not related at all to what I was originally going to say next, which is the impact of the craft on me personally.
Which I would like to hear about.
Yeah. So I'll do the first one quickly. Films nowadays, I think this has happened before. I don't think this is things that just happen now. Film and TV nowadays, I feel, is very moral in that they all are deeply instructional about how the content makers believe that society should function. They are kind of very propagandary. Some people call them like after-school specialty. There's always a super agenda about social conditioning. And other eras of definitely film before. So I don't think that's a modern phenomenon. But the 90s wasn't like that. You just made films and you didn't stop to think about their impact on society, or even like, I don't think we felt that they should be educational for how society should run. I think that we allowed our film and television to be a lot more amoral.
I think,
is that the right way of saying it?
Yeah, I think that is definitely true. Maybe we'll end up disagreeing about this, but I went into the film of theater, film and television at UCLA in the early 2000s, and I wrote my freshman thesis on how I thought that it was really important that people in film and TV actually took responsibility for what they were making, and that if you're going to be creating something that millions of people are going to watch, you should be thinking about what impact it's going to have on society, and you should take more responsibility for it.
But that's so interesting, because then that's your age group, our age group, that then went on to make these
moral... Yeah. Oh, that's true.
Oh my God, it really is your fault.
Yes. I take full responsibility for all of Hollywood.
All of it. That's so interesting.
You're
I probably, when people ask me at that age, have said the same thing. Like, yeah, of course. But it seems a lot now. But this episode isn't about morality, film and television. The craft, for good or bad in terms of its quality, did have a massive influence. I literally watched that film, walked straight out of my door, straight into the nearest pagan shop, signed me up, bulk bought the books, joined the pagan community, became a little witch for a few years because of the craft.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I had a great time with that. For me, there was no downside. There was a lot of hysteria at the time, has been since, about maybe this is a very American thing, like, oh my God, our children are being indoctrinated into witchcraft. Or it's a very evangelical Christian thing because you don't just get them in America. But I learned a lot of nice things from neo-paganism. A lot of it got a little bit kind of deflated for me because I think when you start, you believe like, yes, I'm going to do what ancient women did thousands of years ago, like the Druids, and everything is really authentic. And then you sort of get more into it and you learn that all of this was invented in the 70s.
Yeah. Yeah. Interestingly, I wasn't going to include this, but obviously Harry Potter, when that came out, and still today in some schools in America, is banned. It's a banned book. And I remember hearing about this when it first came out when we were children and being like, that's so crazy. Like, it's a big book, and little children who I knew who weren't reading very well would finish these big books because they were so good. And yet they were making the youth into little witches and wizards. Do you think Harry Potter is like part of that craze, or no? That's just like a totally tangential.
You might be right, because in my mind it was later, but actually it probably wasn't. This
earlier.
This is all 90s.
Yeah.
Let's Google when The Craft came out. Or do you know?
Yeah, no, I don't know, actually.
Let me look it up quickly. I think that, so why was it so popular? It's definitely true that teenagers and teenage girls have no power. It's a really tricky time in your life. You are obviously like, you're coming through puberty, you're getting sexual attention, you're realizing how much power that gives you. I think statistically, it's quite a dangerous time for women because I guess you're going out late, you're drinking, you're putting yourself into situations, or you're testing the boundaries of how you want to be in the world, how far you can push things. Thank you, Naya. And it's so a lot of bad things can happen to teenagers, to teenage girls, but it's also the age where you're least likely to be believed by society. You know, teenagers we think of as overly emotional, not very consistent with the truth. You know, you're lying because you want to stay out of your friends. So you don't necessarily have a whole lot of support if something does happen. And so I guess this idea is very appealing, isn't it? That like, actually I can control nature. I can have a supernatural ability that makes me safer, I guess, and that gives me more agency.
Yeah, totally. That's my, again, there are aspects of The Craft which I think that they did well, but I just think they could have done a better job, not to morally whack it over the head, but that I wouldn't want my niece watching that movie and thinking like, this is who I should aspire to be. Yeah, because they're stealing and they're disempowered in a lot of ways that I think wouldn't necessarily be, like, in addition to all the ways that teenage girls don't have any power anyways, they like extra don't have any power.
But do you think that everything young people watch has to be aspirational?
I don't think it needs to be aspirational, but I think it should be considered. I mean, again, this is a tangent. I feel like we're turning this into like
I know, we're accidentally doing it.
I could stand on a soapbox for a long time about all the shit she watches on YouTube, which is damaging her brain and her self-esteem. But no, I mean, I don't think it needs to be aspirational, but I do think if you're making content for young adults, then you should be considered. Hollywood knew who they were speaking to. They were speaking to teenage girls and preteens.
So The Craft came out in 1996. The first Harry Potter book came out in 1997.
Hey, okay. There we go.
That's so interesting. I hadn't realized they were that close. We, in our Y2K episode, we talk about this, like, the millennium is coming, the age of Aquarius, new age spirituality. Obviously, that's all very packaged up. And then it sort of follows, doesn't it? Once you get into things like neo-paganism, crystals, crystal healing, astrology, I feel like they're all a parcel to me. Once you get into one of them, you sort of will end up at least checking out whether you vibe with the other stuff.
Yeah, totally.
And that was all definitely making a comeback, it seems.
Absolutely. And I also feel, but it's very much just a feeling, that it's a little bit more socially acceptable. I feel like when The Craft came out and when we were younger, we were like, I still felt like there's a part of me that's doing it to rebel, even though my parents were not Christian and like couldn't have cared less. And I think my mom picked up my little preteen witch book and she was like, this is interesting. And then she became a witch. I think that it seems to be more prevalent now. But when we were growing up, you had the craft, and then you had like 17 or Cosmopolitan had the horoscopes, but you didn't have the total prevalence, I felt like, of people really knowing loads about your horoscope and what your rising sign was and what that meant, and all the other new age things that I think are like a larger part now of certainly people we know's lives. And I wonder whether or not that is Naya has a lot to say on this episode. If you hear her background.
Really, yeah, no, I shut the door.
But I think we've also talked about the concept that the self is kind of taking over the spiritual world. And I wonder whether or not crystals and all of that and its prevalence now feeds into that we don't have kind of traditional church and spirituality in the same way. So this kind of becomes like a quick fix for a kind of spirituality, but that is still very self-focused.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Even though it's not what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, but I think you make a good point. Especially, I suppose, if you take sort of those things on their own merit, rather than, even though neo-paganism is actually sort of very new, masqueraded something is very ancient. And they would say, I guess, it's based on sort of some of the things that we know about ancient pagan practice. Obviously not the animal sacrifices that would have gone on in actual pagan times. Because neo-paganism, or at least when I was looking into it, was still the whole point is it's connected to the earth. It's nature worship. It's about understanding the cycles of the earth. And it's very community-based. You literally come together to do the rituals. You can't do them on your own. And I tended to do a lot of that as a kid. But actually, it's more beholden on you to find a group, because they are rituals designed to be done communally. But if, I suppose, yes, you could just get into crystals and that kind of thing, and aromatherapy without any of that. And then I guess it can be really personally focused. Then we leak into things like manifesting, don't we? Which again are all quite self-focused doctrines, if that's the right word for it.
Yeah.
Practices.
Yeah, totally. I mean, absolutely, I agree. And I'm not talking about people who are practicing neo-paganism with a coven, or like who are quite connected.
Oh, yeah. No, I don't feel like you're being scapegoat on the whole thing. I never considered actually really how those different pressures or scenarios worked amongst this idea now that we are much more individually focused.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose also like any point that a religion reaches the shelves of Primark for you to be able to buy it in their homeware department, you have to question how authentic to its original moral standing or like ethos it really is.
Also, how much of an outlier you are. Like, you're right. Like, you went long out of satanic panic when all of this stuff became fashionable. So finding out that your teenager was practicing witchcraft probably was quite disturbing to a lot of parents who weren't necessarily particularly Christian or strictly religious, in a way that I just don't think is the case nowadays. I guess probably, again, because their parents are our generation. If a 15-year-old tells you she's really into crystals, you're probably like, great, let me get my smudge stick out and we can both go on a ritual hike together. I mean, kids are probably horrified now. Maybe that's why they're becoming more religious, because that is a rebellion against a lot of their Gen X, older millennial parents.
Yeah. You've looked into the rise of religion.
I have,
is that right?
I've accidentally skipped us ahead a little.
Tell me all about it.
Well, do we want to start with, I will happily tell you all about it, own experience with religion.
Sure.
So we both got into witchcraft because of the craft.
Obviously.
And its excellent fashion choices, let's be honest.
Sure.
Were you brought up in a religious environment?
Absolutely not. No. My mom was raised... She went to Catholic school. Her parents were divorced. Her mom was Catholic and tried to petition for an annulment so that my mom would have been considered, what's the word for it, illegitimate, which upset her to no end.
Your mother's mother?
So my grandmother tried to petition because she was Catholic and she wanted to get remarried. She tried to petition for an annulment.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which my mom was very angry about.
Yes.
And... Yeah, agreed.
Wow, Grandma.
Anyways, and my mom was raised in a convent school, and they didn't like that she was left-handed as well, because they thought that was the work of the devil. So she was not a super fan of Catholicism. But anyways, she lived for a short time with her first husband when she was like 17 on Mount Shasta, which is known for its sort of hippie, magical people, in a commune there. And then thankfully exited that first relationship and then met my dad at a levitation cult in Haight-Ashbury, where they lived together.
This. It's so 17.
I know. They lived together and they learned to levitate. So not overly religious in the sense that I think maybe that would normally refer to. And then they had my brother and I, and eventually at some point we moved, when I was a child, we moved for a short time to a very small town outside of Boston where, interestingly, my mom realized later that some of her Puritan ancestors had moved to that same town hundreds of years before.
Ooh.
And for social reasons, they started going to church a little bit, but mainly just so they could drop me off at Sunday school. But the church that was like our local church was Unitarian.
What's that?
So it basically means that it's like a sect of Christianity, sort of, that also absorbs other sects. So you can be like a Unitarian pagan. You can be a Unitarian like Methodist. You can be a Unitarian of lots of things. And so we had a female pastor, and we learned about like Native Americans in Sunday school. And we also like learned the Lord's Prayer, but sort of it was like in the background, basically.
It's like the Ocado of churches,
I guess. But anyway, so they said to stay socially. They were not religious at all. And then my dad later on in life, when my parents were separated, married for a time a Muslim woman and then adopted Islam. And then my mom maintains sort of a loose pagan lifestyle. How about you?
My parents are both Christian in a very relaxed way. So we were brought up around Christianity, but my parents weren't actively religious. And it's a bit of a quirk of fate that I ended up going to Catholic school for 4 years. Not like with the nuns, girls only strict Catholic school. It was a mixed state school. So that's why I did my first communion and my confirmation. But I think had I gone to a different school, my parents wouldn't have been particularly bothered about whether or not that happened. My mother grew up in Rome, very famously. You'll know, you love my Catholic stories. So in a very Catholic heritage family, I was christened in the Vatican.
I love that.
Like, yes, we know, bitch. In St. Peter's Basilica, my mother's family was historically honored for 7 generations of being pure blood Roman, so had their dowries paid for by the Vatican. And her uncle, my great uncle, was a priest in the Vatican. So yeah, like religion is all around, but not actively practiced. Mm-hmm. And then my dad would have been Church of England. That's what he would have been around at school. He went to boarding school, so you go to church. I don't know how he would describe himself. My mother, I suppose similar to your mother, then went through a lot of kind of soul searching and at various times in her life has enjoyed other types of spiritualities, particularly maybe like, you know, a bit of Buddhism, maybe a little bit of paganism, been much more open to spirituality in a broad sense. And my dad is generally a very private person, so he could equally turn around to me and say, actually, no, I don't believe in any of it, as much as he would say, no, in my heart, I am a Christian and I actually pray every night. And I wouldn't know, actually. Yeah. And maybe that's lovely, like it's a private thing. But we went to church at Christmas and at Easter and for special occasions. I was the only one of my sisters not to get married in a church. But my parents weren't fussed about that. Actually, but some of my mother's relations were. So my mother had to lie and say it was a Protestant church. They went there. And then, yes, there's a pipeline from Catholicism into paganism because they wanted to make it as easy as possible to convert pagans to Catholicism. So once you're already in the theatrics of Catholicism, paganism is a kind of like great step away from that because you've still got the drama, you've still got the cycles. I mean, Catholicism cannot be beaten for theatricality. And paganism is very over the top and ritualistic as well. And I like that about both of them, actually, because I do think part of the seeking out of religion, maybe this is just me, is this desire for something else. I want something mystical. I want to be taken away from the mundaneness of life. And that is probably why things like, you know, very evangelical based, very Puritan based Protestantism has never appealed to me. It's just so no frills, not for me.
Yeah. There's something I remember when I was younger going into Catholic churches, and one thing I will say for them is that they knew how to build.
Hell yeah.
Because you go into these spaces and I always found it quite difficult to not feel sort of spiritually moved, because obviously so much time and energy had gone into designing these spaces so that you felt small and you felt like there was something bigger and magical and beautiful beyond you, and that was, just like so much larger than you could ever be. And I think they did that right.
So I love religious history. I don't know if there's something you like. Yeah. At school, we did the Reformation, the Counter-Reformation, and that's all fascinating. At the time, it really didn't help me feel more that I believed in Christianity, because when you start to see the political maneuverings of something that's supposed to be above all of that, I think it's like when you're a kid, you're like, oh, hang on, I thought this was all about like, we believe this because it was true. And actually you're telling me you believe this because it politically suited the expansionist aims of whatever leader at the time wanted to conquer whatever it was, and the amount of man-made machinations over what was the word of God, which gospels are included, why do we believe the things that we believe. And so as a kid, I found my moment of being like, I don't think I believe in any of this, was when I was doing my confirmation. And
tricky timing.
Yeah, well, yeah. And I just remember feeling this terrible sense of like, oh my God, I have to stand up and confirm my adherence to the Catholic faith in front of everybody. But I don't believe in any of this. And it seems so obvious to me. I've been through lots of like cycles of spirituality. So this is my 12-year-old cycle of spirituality. None of this makes sense to me. Some of it seems completely illogical to me. I don't know how anyone could believe in this. This is my thought at the time. But it would have been so awkward to have not gone through with it. And I was thinking about this because obviously we were preparing for this episode. And I don't think my parents would have cared in a religious sense, not being religious themselves, practicing, and my siblings didn't have their confirmation. It was more the sort of societal embarrassment. That's the very English thing. I would have caused a scene.
Yeah.
It would have been awkward and a little bit unseemly for me to have pulled out of the confirmation, because at the age of 12, I decided that all Christianity was bullshit in my mind at the time. So I just went through with it, but I felt terrible.
Wow, that's crazy. It's so deep, Tempest. I never knew that. But you bring me on to something else that I find really fascinating, and maybe you can illuminate as somebody from Great Britain. So we went to a friend's. You know what I'm about to say?
So if it is what I think it is, this so highlights the difference between religion in America and religion here.
Yeah, exactly. So Pip, my partner, and I went to a friend's baptism, right? So their third child or whatever. And it was right around Easter time. So they had like a service, and then at the end of the service, them and I think one of the couple who's having child baptized came up. During this service, there was a family sitting in front of us who got asked to come up and read. And they had 3 girls who were probably the ages of like 4, 6, and 8. And each of the children took turns in reading this passage from the Bible, which was basically all about burning pagans at the stake. And I just remember looking around, being like, a small child is talking about murder and nobody seems to mind. Nobody batted an eyelid. Nobody cared. And I was so horrified. And I spoke to Pip about it afterwards. I was like, what was going on? Like, why didn't anyone care? I don't understand. And he's like, oh, because no one's listening. And it doesn't matter. They're just words. What? He's like, yeah. They're just words. And this is somebody who also went to boarding school, went to chapel every day, is confounded at the fact that my American family doesn't know the words to most chapel songs, most hymns.
I'm confounded by this.
Why would we? But yeah, I just don't, I think as an American, it's a really interesting thing, because there is this concept of the separation between church and state. And I don't know if it's that or if it's just that like Americans are earnest people and so we believe in the power of what we're saying. I don't know, but I was so dumbstruck. And then I told you about it and you agreed with Pip.
I did. It's so interesting to me. I don't even know how to explain it. Americans are very literal with words. I think that's a big cultural difference here. And again, I think that comes from the Protestant tradition. The Bible is the word of God.
Yeah, true.
And even in Catholicism, that's not true. Well, certainly, I can't speak to Irish Catholicism, but in Roman Catholicism, hey, these sound like some nice ideas. Let's think about them and see how we go. Like, it's not taken literally. They are metaphors, or they're there to kind of get your mind rolling and not meant to be taken word for word. But I feel like that's very different in America. And culturally, then, I think that makes things different. Sometimes I wonder why, or is that the reason satire isn't a big thing in America? Because it's all really based on the premise that I say one thing, but I mean another. Like our literary tradition in Britain, England, Britain. I mean, you know, Shakespeare, all of those playwrights, it's all about kind of using words to create sometimes falsehood, sometimes to have double meanings. You know, I say one thing, but I mean another. And so much humor is based on this kind of British mechanism of being indirect, of using words in like strange ways where you really need to have an understanding of the culture to really know what someone means. Because if you take them on what they say, you'll really miss what it is that they're trying to say. Conventions of politeness. And for me, that's just the same social currency with which we take religion, especially kind of Church of England. And it's like, yeah, that 5-year-old talking about burning in hell. But that's just words.
Yeah. But I guess it's the Protestant tradition. Because I also remember my mom saying, who grew up in America, but in a Catholic school, that she was raised like this, that it was an allegory, right? That the 7 days is an allegory for the millions of years that it actually took. Versus now, you know, many, many moons on, they are trying to teach that it's, creationism, that it is the word of God, that it was actually 7 days.
Europeans think this is insane when Americans do this. The Bible is not historical account.
Well, I'm aware of that. Thank you.
Ruined religion for everybody, okay? You cannot take these things too literally.
No, I know. I agree. I agree. The other thing that Americans take literally, which we've talked about a little bit before, is this concept of predestination. So, and I'm not even sure that, like, if you ask your average American, that they would either agree with this or that they, if they did ultimately agree that it was true, if they would have thought about it or like known it before. But predestination is this concept that was rooted in, may have existed elsewhere, but it was one of the sort of tenets of Puritanism. And the Puritans were part of the first, you know, European people to come to the Americas, to what would become the United States of America. And it's this concept that before the world began, God decided who was going to ultimately be a good person and who would be a bad person, and those bad people would rot in hell forever. And so it doesn't matter what you do, you still have to like take pride in your work, you still have to work hard, because by doing that, you're sort of showing up to God's master plan. But it seeps into this thought process that you don't have to take any social responsibility for things that are going on. Like if you're successful because God chose you. And if somebody else is struggling, they're struggling because they're a bad person. Like, it's not that they're struggling in their life or that they've like fallen down. They are literally a bad person who God hates, and therefore they should not support them.
Is this where prosperity gospel comes from? Like, idea like that you're wealthy because you are blessed by God.
Yes.
I was just looking up Calvinism because that's so I guess it's unique to America. Is it because of the founding fathers being Puritans? Because it's a European.
Well, I don't know if it's. I wouldn't
doctrine.
say. Yeah, it's a good point.
The roots of it.
Why didn't it kind of like take hold here, and then why? That's a good question. I don't know.
I mean, it did in some parts.
But I guess why do you still not see the effects of it in the same way that I would argue you do see it seeping into American culture?
Well, is that simply because Protestantism, Calvinism, was one of a whole kind of cultural religious wars over this? people burnt at the stake. You've got Mary I, and then you've got Edward, and then Elizabeth, and the schism in the church, the different reformations. I mean, lots of people died over the arguments of which interpretation of Christianity should be in play. But I suppose because Protestantism was new, it was, I wouldn't say kept in check, but it wasn't the only doctrine, and a lot of people did not agree with it at all. And then it fractured off into other different ways of thinking. Whereas is the difference, please correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know a lot about American history, but the founding fathers came from that tradition of Protestantism. So they sort of set up a lot of America rooted in this theology in the way that obviously didn't happen because European society isn't rooted in Protestantism.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think also what's one of the beneficial parts, sort of argue how beneficial, but was that because they had come across, the way that it's taught in history class when you're a child at least, is that because they had come across as this persecuted group, although they were not particularly fond of other types of Christian people or anybody else in any other religion, and they were very much like a prophesized indoctrinating other people into Puritanism. Because they had been persecuted, there was this concept that when they went to set up the first laws of the country, that religious freedom had to exist to some degree.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
That is why there is the separation between church and state. Now, I don't know whether or not, I can imagine that there was still lots of tension and how much you were able to practice other religions freely. I kind of doubt, but I'm not an expert, so I couldn't say.
Oh, okay.
But that's what we're taught, at least. That's the propaganda version of it.
Well, you didn't have people executed for being the wrong religion in America like you did in Europe, did you?
Mm-mm.
So, yes, I suppose in that way. I don't know if some of that's also just the time in history, like whether our executions happened earlier. When was America founded?
1776.
Hamilton! I've watched that movie. Yeah. Yes, so maybe it's a little later than our religious wars.
Well, yeah, because people had been coming over for a lot longer. They were fully settled by the time that the Revolutionary War happened. I can't remember when Columbus was, 15, 16? I don't know. I should maybe
okay, yeah.
So they'd been there a while. And also, if you were living inside of a Puritan community when you first came over, you were definitely not allowed to just be like, I've decided I now practice the rule of the, I don't know, whispering tree version of Christianity. And therefore, you, inside of your small individual communities, you could definitely be persecuted. But once we kind of grew into a nation, then you were technically supposed to be allowed to be whatever kind of God-fearing person you wanted to be.
Yeah. I guess you didn't have religious wars like we had across Europe. I mean,
they let the Mormon church survive, for Christ's sake.
Yeah, so many people were tortured and murdered across Europe over interpretations of religion.
Yeah.
For sure. Did you ever get into atheism, the new atheist movement?
I definitely toyed around with, am I an atheist? As I think just an exploration in my youth around testing the boundaries of how I felt. I don't know much about the new atheist movement, though, if you want to illuminate us all.
Well, I'd like to illuminate you all. But it's our generation, that whole God delusion, Richard Dawkins, the kind of rise of science and rejection of religion and rejection of the idea that we need religion for morality. God Delusion is a great book. At the time, it had a huge impact on me, and I was like, oh my God, everyone should read this. And I don't consider myself an atheist now, but I still think everyone should read it because it's a fascinating book. It will tell you a lot about why we even have religion. So, for example, there are things like, obviously, in our original hunter-gatherer societies, people who were more alert to danger survived longer. And a kind of evolutionary fallout of that is our desire to ascribe intention and personality to things that either don't exist or are inanimate objects. So kind of hardwired into our survival is this belief that there's something else out there, that this thing that is just a thing has its own thoughts and feelings, this concept of God in a way, and storytelling in that kind of religiosity, that spirituality. So all of that is fascinating. I think it's a great book. the problem with it, so Dawkins is this interesting thing that I certainly see in my life, which is like, it'll start off with Catholicism, and a lot of Catholics who get disillusioned with Catholicism end up in kind of neo-paganism. And then because neo-paganism is sort of nature worship, then actually you get to the point where you're like, actually, what fills me with wonder is the reality of the world that we live in, and how you really need to worship this like alleged man in the sky with his list of wrongdoings. But actually, you know, you can go on nature walk, and the fact that we exist and the things that happen in nature exist is so incredibly wonderful and magical in its own right, that you sort of develop a spirituality attached to nature. But then that's actually very science-based. You get to this kind of new atheism, which is like, so what do you call that? Naturism is essentially sexed up atheism, because it's the worship of, obviously, the world that we live in, which is what science is concerned with, or that was his argument. So yeah, you do sort of get there. Looking back on it, now we're in this time, again, of change, and we are the generation that I think rejected a lot of religion, that was much more interested in spirituality. And we can discuss, I guess, did we develop actually into quite a godless, quote unquote, society where the self is the highest thing? We've lost, people mourn that we've lost a lot of community, communality, sense of shared morality. Now it's all about like what's best for the individual, and fuck actually what that means for the society as a whole, because the individual is the highest self. We sort of made, well, people may argue, we've made the individual ego God in replacement. That we're starting to be in the beginnings of the backlash to that, which comes back to your earlier question of whether young people are getting into religion, and apparently a lot of Gen Z are. And instead of going for the more benign religions like Church of England, obviously here, that has tried, I think, to keep up with the cultural changes. And actually that's done it a disservice, because young people find all of this kind of soulless and weak, and what they want is discipline and community, but apparently particularly young men who have been so clearly left out of the kind of changing liberal society. So Catholicism is hugely back in vogue amongst young people, and Islam.
I mean, I would believe it, and I think it makes sense, because obviously if we live in a world, particularly if you grew up in the last 20 years, and you grew up with cell phones, and you grew up with like your whole community is a sort of like disjointed. We may have been the ones who were like starting to tear community down because we didn't like what it had looked like for past generations. I think I would argue that we've taken it definitely like many steps too far, in that people are so isolated now. And I can completely understand why the appeal. I mean, I found religion more appealing when I was younger than I do now. And I can definitely understand, like, if you feel isolated and alone and you want structure in your life, everything now is negotiable, it feels like. But for like a religion like Catholicism, or certainly in Islam, it is not negotiable.
Yeah.
Well, you said that it is, but in Roman Catholicism, but
not really. Like yes, I guess how seriously you could take it, but the structure is there.
Yeah,
you can adhere to it.
Yeah.
As much as you wish.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. It brings down to another question, which we didn't touch on. Do you believe in, where have you sort of fallen with your religious journey now? Like, do you believe in an afterlife? Do you believe in a higher power?
It's a big question, Christina.
The $1 million one.
Yeah. So I went through my atheist period. And here's the thing that some of you young people are not going to like, because I didn't, and I didn't understand it, which is that when people get older, they then tend to loop back often to religion. And when I was young, I used to be like, no, because you're closer to dying. So you're starting to worry about whether or not you really might go to hell. Because that just seemed like the logical thought process for the age that I am at. And now I am in my 40s. What I think happens is that, firstly, some of it's nostalgic. Like, if you look back on a time that will always seem simpler and more wholesome than the time that you're living in, and you'll wonder if the structures that existed were actually better for society. So that's one reason why older people tend to get a little bit more, I think, can get more religious. And the other thing is, I don't know how you feel about this, now I've lived in a world, and particularly in a pocket of the world, which swings from being very apathetic towards religion and quite anti-religious. I've seen what replaces it. And one of the criticisms when I got into atheism that people would say to me was, all right, fine, you get rid of religion, fine, but people will find other ways to be horrible to each other. Human beings will be horrible to each other. They don't need religion to do it. And I would have said, well, okay, fine, but religion gives them an absolutely perfect structure to do it, and it has created a lot of evils in the world. That is true. I think you could say that that's not fundamentally true. A lot of evil has been committed in the name of religion. But I suppose I've lived long enough to actually see what those things are. And some of what I've seen in terms of like cancel culture, purity spirals, kind of dogma in progressive circles has not taught me that when I thought I was younger, like maybe there's a better way of running the world, and us in our spheres are the more enlightened people who don't need these old school trappings of religion, because we'll just create a better, more equal world because we believe in equality and all of these wonderful things. And those are great things to aspire to. But I don't think that is what happens. It's as I've watched religion become less important in our society. I just think they've been replaced with other harmful traditions, kind of secular religions, essentially godless religions. So I sort of feel like, I don't think everyone needs religion, but I think society needs some kind of moral structure and something that is communal, and that it is good for people to have a sense that there is something bigger than us. In my personal opinion, I would like that to focus on a good association. I've never believed, first of all, that I thought God is too busy to worry about whether you ate meat on a Friday or all of these like little petty insurrections people have been made to feel, whether you're left-handed, all of that rubbish, whether you have a child out of wedlock, that's not a God that I think of even as being realistic, and certainly not one that I want to worship. But I have softened towards this more Christian idea of like, there is an inherent good within each of us, and we should aspire to access that part of ourselves. And I hadn't realized until recently that that's actually quite unique to New Testament thinking, because I suppose it's this thing of like, what's that cute story? Like the fish is in the sea asking how to get to the ocean or whatever. Like we swim in the circles that we're brought up within, so we take them for granted. And I think that sort of comes of age as well. I feel like I've just rambled a whole lot of stuff that might not be very coherent.
No, I think it all makes sense. Yeah, I still take issue with a lot of religion, Catholicism included, just because, particularly with so much of like the pedophile that they covered up, but just everything, right? Like you just go back through the history and it is rampant with violence and subjugation of women and all sorts of like hideous things. But I think the last thing which you touched on, I think that is something that I feel is missing in my own life now that I had more when I was younger, which maybe was just because of the proximity of being around like church and like hearing these things talked about in some kind of way, shape, or form in a more recent capacity than I have for the last, 20, 25, 30 years. But yeah, that concept that there's like good in us and that we should be together as a community trying to like do good. I think that is really nice. And I think if that can be bundled up in a religion that isn't hideous, then great.
Yeah, I don't know how that works, because I think I used to be like, so everyone can be individually spiritual, and I think actually most people are individually spiritual if they really drilled down into whether or not they felt that there was like a higher purpose or there was something bigger than us. I don't really believe in the concept of heaven, but I do sort of feel, nature is energy. We learn in science that energy doesn't vanish, it goes somewhere. I imagine that maybe we can't even conceptualize what that might be, but the notion that we die and everything it isn't even replicated, I think, in the natural world around us. So so that part of like super rationalist atheism, I don't get, because we do have an internal consciousness, an internal monologue, and an energy. We're expelling energy all the time. That's got to go somewhere. Even if reincarnation is what's true and it goes into the earth, I could believe that. That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And so I used to think that sort of internal sense was enough, but now I don't think it is. I think you have to find some way of binding people. And so I don't know. Am I now more amenable to this idea of like, we should have a religion, but maybe we shouldn't take it super seriously. And as a young person, where you think you're quite dogmatic about stuff, that seems like such a wishy-washy, spineless cop-out of crap that just is hideous. Like, I would have hated that when I was young. I don't know. Maybe it's okay.
I think it's a tricky one, because I guess the other thing which comes to mind is sort of then, do you have a shared group of morals as the other form of community is as a nation? But nationalism is obviously something that a lot of people see as problematic now, and that's a whole separate topic we can touch on in another episode. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it would definitely be nice to find a like nice, cozy way of approaching the world where we like band together as a community to be nice.
I mean, you're
people.
describing the Church of England.
Well, maybe I'll start going.
That is literally the Church. Yeah. Warm biscuits and Vicar of Dibley.
But nobody wants to go. Why is it on the decline then? It's not strong enough.
Because I think young people want an antidote, and the Church of England, one theory is the Church of England got so on board with a lot of kind of, I don't know whether you want to call it wokeism or progressivism or kind of, the Church of England moved in the way that liberal society did. There we go. So if you don't like the way liberal society moved, the Church of England is not going to be for you. But in the grand scheme of different types of religions and Christianity, what you are describing is the Church of England, because it's about the village green and the village fete and having tea with the vicar, and let's not get too wound up about this, that, and the other. Let's just be good neighbors.
I suppose also though, like children, I think we've talked about this before. I don't know if we've done on the podcast, but like when I was a youth, I was such a little mini asshole. Do you know what I mean? Like I was like a little mini dictator. Do you know what I mean? And everybody, it was so black and white. Like either you were with me or you were against me. Either you were like successful or you were a loser.
Yeah.
Everything was, it was so amped up. And so maybe it's not surprising that the youth want something that's like more structured and more rigid.
Yeah.
Because they're little rigid creatures.
It's the reason that terrorism and cults recruit youths. Yeah, teenagers. Because you are in this incredibly authoritarian state of mind.
Yeah, that's it.
And I don't think that gets talked about enough, because we live in a culture where youth voice is amplified through the internet in a way that's never happened before, and they know how to use that medium better than everybody else. So we are, in a way that I think just never existed in history, living in the world created by the mentality of young people. And it's very compassionless. It's very polarizing. It does this weird thing. Sorry, kids, but it's this thing of like, if you don't believe what I believe, you're an evil person and bad things should happen to you. And that horrifies people. And, I don't know whether I bring this up or not. We are recording this in the week of Charlie Kirk assassination. And lots of people will have very mixed feelings about that and what he said. And not necessarily the time and the place for us to air that, because we're going to need much longer than what we have here. But what horrifies a lot of people is that some people who say that they are against fascism, they are on the side of the moral good, seem to be delighting in the assassination of somebody whose primary medium was words. If you think somebody should die for what they've said, then you're a fascist. Sorry, that is what fascism is, that people should be assassinated for their ideas. What a liberal society says is, I might think your ideas are fucking awful, but as long as they remain ideas and not instruction or call to violence, you have the right to say them. And I think there's an age, the way that you look at the world and absorb those ideas, some of that is impacted by how long you've been on this earth and how much experience you have of human nature.
Yeah, I don't really want to wade in because, as you know, I've read like almost no articles or no news on what's happened. But I think it's a tricky topic. I mean, I think what you're saying is absolutely correct. Completely agree with that. I think there seemed to be sentiment from people who sat on the other side of the aisle, again, with this sort of deep polarization that I would argue something as early as predestination has led to in American politics. And that even though it's supposed to be a separation church and state, we really have so much more influence of church in topics in American politics that it's also a time when people feel scared and they feel very nervous about actions which the Republican Party have made. So I think it's I'm not discounting anything you say. I completely agree. If you think that, you are a fascist. But I think it's a really complicated time in America right now that has lots of very terrifying things going on. And I will look into poor Charlie Kirk's death because it sounds horrific. Not the laughing matter.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not saying this episode will necessarily do, but that the whole thing you could talk for hours about. And people are. It's all social media is at the moment, which is important. They're really important topics. I suppose this goes to this idea of words and what words mean. And again, in America, words being very literal in the way that they're not here. But I think a lot of modern activism has absorbed this idea of words being literal. If words are violence, then violence are the same as words. And when we've got, or people, older people feel like we've gone into this strange territory where these things have become the same in a way that we've never considered before. There is a world of difference between saying something and doing something. But actually, that's not what a lot of young people have been brought up with. And that's not led us, I think, in a good direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember when I was growing up, you were still definitely taught that it was like one of the tenets of Americanism is that you could say freedom of speech, that you could say something that somebody else found abhorrent, but they had to let you say your piece because then they could stand up on their own soapbox and say the exact opposite. Do you know what I mean? That was it was supposed to be one of the things made you proud to be an American. So I think it's a really worrying move that if people start to think that words and actions are the same thing, then that's a real problem.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of people have been brought up on.
Which is crazy. But I guess that's probably, I suppose that feeds back to why we started this podcast to begin with, isn't it? Because we both felt, I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but I certainly felt increasingly I can't speak my mind or ask a question or wonder about something without somebody trying to cancel me or tell me that I'm some kind of evil Nazi or, you just can't ask questions anymore about anything.
Yeah.
And that's just a word-based thing. That's a debate. That's a discussion. That's totally different than going out and shooting someone.
Yeah. What a place we've got into ourselves. Can we blame Gen X for that?
I'd like to.
I know. Can we have a vote as a generation and be fine, we'll accept X, Y, and Z, but A, B, C, and D, you guys have to take because I feel like we have already so much atonement to do.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. We love making this podcast and we really want it to grow. So if you enjoyed listening to us,
please subscribe, give us a 5-star rating. Also, feel free to comment, DM us, open up a conversation. The whole point of this podcast is to be in support of having open lines of communication and debate, and we would love to hear from you.
Listen to the sirens.
Woo!